Hello, and welcome to this presentation, Getting Started with the CMA180 POCSAG Testing. In this presentation, we'll explain how to configure and use the Rohde Schwarz CMA180 radio test set to generate POCSAG signals. This presentation assumes a basic understanding of both POCSAG paging, as well as POCSAG configuration and modulation parameters. If you're unfamiliar with these topics, or if you'd like a brief review, you might want to watch the presentation Understanding POCSAG before beginning this presentation. The CMA180 radio test set can generate standard compliant messages for testing POCSAG pagers. This requires option CMA B110 for the baseband generator and CMA KG260 for POCSAG generation. The parameters used in creating POCSAG transmissions are user configurable, and these include the frequency and generator output level, the FSK deviation and the baud rate, the pager address, more commonly known as the cap code, and the type and content of the page, that is, tone-only, numeric, or alphanumeric paging messages. To configure POCSAG generation, click on the global toolbar and then choose the RX scenario under the Digital tab at the top of the screen. There are two important icons in the main RX test GUI. The first is the Play Stop button, which is used to start or stop the generation of POCSAG signals. The second is the generator configuration, which provides access to the RF and digital settings. Let's start by looking at RF settings. This is where we select the RF output connector, either RF out or RF COM. Also, be sure that the On checkbox is enabled. The next parameter is frequency, which must match the frequency that the pager is configured to use. The generator output level can also be adjusted as needed, and the external attenuation parameter can be adjusted to account for any cable loss, etc. in the test setup. And finally, the source type must be set to POCSAG in order to configure POCSAG modulation. With regards to connecting the pager under test, it's important to keep in mind that most pagers do not have an external antenna, and thus the connection must often be made over the air, using an antenna connected to the configured RF output port, that is either to RF COM or RF out, as mentioned on the previous slide. When testing POCSAG over the air, there are a few recommendations for obtaining the best results. The first is to use an antenna that's closely matched to the frequency of the RF signal, since this will maximize the amount of power radiated by the antenna and minimize the amount of power reflected back towards the CMA. Also, the output power level may need to be adjusted to account for path loss and other considerations. And finally, a shield box or shield room may be helpful if testing is performed in the presence of other over-the-air signals in the same frequency range. POCSAG parameters are configured by going to the Digital tab and then selecting the POCSAG tab at the bottom of the screen. This dialog can be divided into two general sections: modulation parameters on the left side of the screen and data parameters on the right side of the screen. Let's start by looking at modulation parameters. Although the modulation settings display the mode, this value is fixed to 2 FSK for POCSAG transmission. The other important parameter is the frequency deviation, that is, the distance above and below the center frequency. By default, this is set to plus minus 4.5 kHz, which is the common wideband spacing used by many POCSAG systems. It's also important to note that POCSAG normally uses the positive deviation to indicate a logical 0, and a negative deviation to indicate a logical 1. This is the opposite of most 2FSK systems. The inverted modulation checkbox can, however, be used to swap the interpretation of these two symbols. Now let's move on to the data settings. Repetition defines if the page is sent a single time or continuously when the generator is enabled. The symbol rate must be set to a rate supported by the pager, typically 512, 1200, or 2400 baud. The pager address field should be configured with a 7-digit cap code from the pager. The CMA allows the two function bits to be set, although the meaning or use of these bits can vary between paging systems. The pager type value indicates if the page is a tone-only page or whether it contains a numeric or alphanumeric message. The contents of the page are entered in the Message Content field, but keep in mind that the configured pager type will determine what can be entered in this field, that is, numeric values or alphanumeric text. Let's end with a brief summary. The Rohde Schwarz CMA180 radio test set can generate paging messages as per the POCSAG standard. Since pagers generally do not have an external antenna connector, these tests are often made over the air, using an antenna attached to the RF output port. Both RF and data parameters are user-definable, and these include the transmit power, the nominal system or carrier frequency, the deviation, the baud rate, the pager ID or cap code, and the message type and contents. This concludes our presentation, getting started with the CMA180 POCSAG testing. If you'd like to learn more about POCSAG, the CMA180, or other CMA180 measurements, please see the links in the video description. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit us at rohde-schwarz.com.